This video is sponsored by Morgan & Morgan. 92% of Americans drive cars. Of that number, 77% of drivers have experienced at least one car wreck in their life. Now, I'm not trying to scare anybody, but the fact is that car crashes often come with injuries sustained by our bodies in addition to our cars. Now, you guys need to be driving safely out there, but what if, God forbid, something does happen on the road? Where would that leave you physically or financially? Fortunately for all of us, we live in a day and age where technology makes getting help easier than ever, and that's where today's sponsor, America's largest injury law firm, Morgan & Morgan, can come to our rescue. They have over 100 offices and 800 lawyers across the nation who have altogether recovered $15 billion for their clients. But talking to lawyers is scary, right? Wrong. It used to be, but talking to Morgan & Morgan these days is more like ordering a pizza through an app on your phone. So if you're ever injured in an accident, you can check out Morgan & Morgan. It's super easy, and you can actually submit an entire claim in 8 clicks or less without even leaving your couch. For more information, go to forthepeople.com/bandit or dial #law from your cell phone. This has been a paid advertisement, and now onto the video. Zelda and dungeons go hand in hand, or at least they used to. Nowadays, I guess it's more along the lines of Zelda and Sheikah structures. But classic Zelda dungeons have always been a staple of the series, and when it jumped to 3D with the release of Ocarina of Time, the potential of dungeons exploded exponentially into the third dimension. Fast forward a few years and the world was blessed with the release of The Legend of Zelda: The Wind Waker, which came with its own set of dungeons that, might I add, each featured a fresh new take on puzzles and themes. But you know, there's like 1, 2, 3, 4. There's like 9 dungeons in the game, 11 if you count some islands as mini dungeons. With there being so many, I decided I'd reach out to Mr. Wind Waker himself and see if he'd like to help out with explaining the lore behind these dungeons.
I'm Zeltik, and I love Wind Waker. Seriously, it's my favourite game in the series, so I jumped at the chance to join Bandit in discussing its dungeons.
As usual, we're going to cover half of the dungeons in this video and the remaining half in Zeltik's video over on his channel, so be sure to head over there after you're done here. Or hello if you're coming here from there. Oh, and spoiler alert, obviously.
The first dungeon we're going to cover in this video would be the first dungeon in the game, the Forsaken Fortress. In Japanese, it's called the Majuto, which means Demon Beast Island. However, the first time Link visits the island stronghold, it functions more like a mini dungeon than a full-fledged one. But for those who have played Wind Waker before, you'll remember that the Forsaken Fortress is visited multiple times in the game, with the second visit meeting the full criteria for being considered an actual Zelda dungeon. The role that the fortress plays in the game is a relatively simple one. It's the base of operations for the resurrected Ganondorf and his minions. Their living quarters and even a kitchen can be found within the walls of the fort. The fortress is made of hardy stone walls adorned with hanging ship anchors and is armed with cannons that will fire upon any vessel unfortunate enough to be discovered by its many searchlights. Atop the fortress is a broken ship within which Ganondorf himself resides. The stronghold is also home to the fearsome Helmarok King, who lived to serve Ganondorf's every command. Early on in the game, it's discovered that this monstrous bird had been making appearances all over the world, kidnapping young girls with long ears. And as Link ventures throughout the Forsaken Fortress's many rooms, it's uncovered on his second visit that the kidnapped girls are actually being held captive on the island as well, meaning the fortress also functions as a prison. It's also here that Link is finally reunited with his sister, Aryll, and is able to rescue her from whatever fate Ganondorf had in store for the girls. His motivation for kidnapping girls with long ears was to locate the Triforce of Wisdom, which was split apart from the completed relic long ago in the events of Ocarina of Time. As you no doubt are aware, far beneath the surface of the Great Sea lies the ancient and legendary land of Hyrule itself, where Ganondorf, the Triforce, and the history of the Legend of Zelda originated, and it is likely that the Forsaken Fortress is actually found directly above Hyrule's Gerudo Desert region. Although, for a bit more detail into the thought process behind that, Ganon's Tower, and the unseen history of Ganondorf's resurrection in the adult timeline, you'll have to check out the video over on my channel after we're done here. Ganondorf accurately assumed that the Piece of Wisdom was under the protection of a descendant of Zelda, and it's for this reason that he commanded the Helmarok King to hunt down and capture every girl that could possibly fit the criteria for that era's Zelda. After Link returns to the fortress and defeats the Helmarok King, Ganondorf reveals that the Master Sword has long since lost its evil cleansing ability and, as such, is powerless against him, as well as the fact that the drawing of the Master Sword has unlocked his own full power from being frozen in time in Hyrule Castle. But just before he is able to capture Link and the real Zelda, otherwise known as the Pirate Queen Tetra, the Rito, along with Valu the Dragon, arrive and rescue the duo from Ganon's grasp, burning his chamber to a crisp. Following these events though, Ganondorf and his minions actually leave the Forsaken Fortress, leaving it eerily empty, save for a few rats and keys. The only purpose the fortress serves in the game following this is to allow Link and the King of Red Lions easy access to and from Ganon's castle in Hyrule via the dark portal that Ganondorf originally used to enter the world above the sea.
But let's move on, or back up, I guess? The next dungeon to cover would be the Forbidden Woods, located right next to the Forest Haven, which famously houses the Great Deku Tree and Little Koroks. The Deku Tree has forbidden this neighboring area from the Koroks due to the dangerous wildlife lurking inside. But of course, one Korok in particular, named Makar, decided to not heed the Deku Tree's warning and instead fly over the woods, and then fall into them. Since the woods are not accessible from the ocean below, the Deku Tree has to provide Link with a Deku Leaf at this time, and it's with this that Link is able to fly across the sea using cyclones for an updraft and enter the Forbidden Woods, clearing it of monsters and rescuing Makar at long last, after which the duo leaves the woods and the area is never referred to again in the game. With the little amount of time we spend here and the scarcity of mentions of the Forbidden Woods in general, we instead have to look at its appearance and location for some environmental deductions regarding the lore behind this dungeon. For starters, I always found it very interesting how similar the Forbidden Woods are to the Forest Haven proper. Both are large tree trunks with hollowed out interiors that lead to different chambers within which entire ecosystems of wildlife exist. This leads me to believe that both the Forbidden Woods and the Forest Haven are a similar kind of giant tree trunk, and must have both been created out of a similar method. However, obviously the Forbidden Woods has become overgrown with dangerous and downright mean-looking thorns that almost completely encase the trunk. While that is interesting enough, it's what we can find inside the woods that really makes this area stand out. See, on each of the doors within the dungeon, we can find the crest of the Kokiri as well as torches, pots, little houses, and even moving platforms, all of which imply that the area used to be inhabited by none other than the Kokiri tribe. As the Deku Tree states, the Kokiri are the ancestors of the Koroks, so the woods' proximity to the Forest Haven makes sense, as that's where the Koroks currently live. Perhaps the Forbidden Woods actually used to be the Lost Woods, which similarly neighbored the Kokiri Forest, which is most likely the Forest Haven these days, and which the Kokiri lived in and around in Ocarina of Time. The biggest two questions to tackle though are 1. Why are the woods encased in a giant tree trunk similar to the Forest Haven? And 2. What happened to the woods that caused them to be corrupted by dangerous wildlife and chase the Kokiri out? Let's tackle the first question first. It's a fair assumption made by most that the Forest Haven is entirely made out of the wood of the Deku Tree. After all, the Deku Tree is a giant tree and is housed directly in the center of the haven. And while I do think the Forest Haven is located here above the land beneath the waves as a result of the Deku Tree, I'd like to propose that the Deku Tree might have been able to cause the giant trees of the Forest Haven and now the Forbidden Woods to rise above the surface of the water in order to protect not only the Kokiri Forest and the Lost Woods, but the Kokiri themselves following the flooding of the Old World. Since Wind Waker's Great Deku Tree is more than likely the same Deku Tree that appeared to the Hero of Time as a sprout, which we can deduce by the fact that it immediately starts speaking ancient Hylian upon seeing Link's green clothes, and the fact that this is in the adult timeline within which the sprout exists, then the Deku Tree having a tree terraforming ability, if you will, is the only explanation for both of these islands in my opinion. Now, as far as the corruption of the Lost Woods into the modern Forbidden Woods is concerned, we actually do have decently concise proof that this is the work of Ganondorf. You know, besides the obvious trope of evil man did all the evil things. The boss of the Forbidden Woods, the Kale Demos, is a giant carnivorous plant that clearly is a deadly mutation of a Boko Baba. But if we fast forward for 2 seconds and take a sneak peek at the final dungeon of the game, Ganon's castle located far beneath the Great Sea, we once again face the bosses that Ganon is credited with creating, one of which is the Kale Demos, which has its own boss room in the tower, proving that the Kale Demos was a creation of Ganon, and implying heavily that the thorns and downright unfriendly atmosphere are also a result of this corruption, which led the Kokiri to leave the woods and take shelter instead directly around the Deku Tree on the main Forest Haven Island. Perhaps Ganondorf tainted the Lost Woods in an attempt to eliminate the Kokiri and possibly even the Deku Tree as well, in order to kill or flesh out the hero, since his previous encounter with the Hero of Time who came from the Kokiri Forest probably left a bad taste in his mouth for the area. Ultimately, Ganondorf was unable to predict that the next hero would originate from the humble Outset Island, which would eventually prove to be his fatal mistake.
Next up, we have the Wind Temple, one of two ancient temples created for the two new sages of Earth and Wind to conduct their prayers to the gods in order to maintain the Master Sword's evil repelling power. However, Ganondorf personally attacked and killed both sages, and this is why he knew the Master Sword's power had depleted when Link tried to confront him atop the Forsaken Fortress, leading Link and the King of Red Lions to seek out the living descendants of the deceased sages in order to awaken them and empower the Master Sword once again. Interestingly enough, even though the ancient structures were built in Hyrule below, both temples were created within mountains that had accessible entrances located on their mountaintops, sealed away to prevent any unwanted explorers. This would imply that the architects had foreknowledge of Hyrule's eventual flooding, since the mountaintop entrances are the very methods Link must use to access the temples long after Hyrule has been sealed away underneath the Great Sea. The design of the Wind Temple is difficult to grasp since it includes many platforms and giant fans, including the biggest one located in the central, cylindrical room, but nothing we can see within the temple implies it had any grand purpose, outside of being a series of physical puzzles and challenges, not unlike most other dungeons and the Sheikah shrines from Breath of the Wild, many of which also feature giant fans and wind currents. The only fair assumption behind the Wind Temple's design would be to throw off possible intruders from reaching the sage's prayer chamber, effectively protecting the sage and therefore the power of the Master Sword. Since the Wind Temple has been accessed by Ganondorf in order to kill the Sage of Wind, it's now home to many monsters which presumably were not present previously, such as the boss of the temple, the flying sand monster known as Mulgara. There are a few enemies in the area that may have had other origins, such as the Armos and Armos Knight statue monsters, but that's a theory for another day. In order to access the Wind Temple, Link must find a way to approach the Octorok statue that's blowing harsh winds out of its mouth, preventing entrance. To do this, Link has to travel to the Ice Ring Isle, a strange little island that's permanently encased in a sub-zero environment and serves as a mini-dungeon that must be completed in 5 minutes or less after temporarily warming the temperature of the isle with a fire arrow. After entering the isle through its dragon-like mouth entrance and carefully crossing its icy platforms, Link is rewarded with the Iron Boots. As some fans will remember, this is quite similar to the iron boots that the Hero of Time is able to find in Ocarina of Time after venturing through the Ice Cavern, which is a remarkably similar setup to what happens in this game. The only connections between the two events, however, are speculative at best, but it is interesting that the key piece of equipment needed to access the Wind Temple is hidden away within the Ice Ring Isle, which the dragon sculptures might suggest is man-made. Since the iron boots, clearly placed inside the Ice Ring Isle purposefully, are necessary for entrance to the Wind Temple's mountaintop opening, it's possible that the two locations share the same creators. The exact same setup happens with Fire Mountain, but I'll let you guess which video you can check out for a deeper look there. Once Link has the iron boots in hand, or rather in feet, he can then approach the Wind Octorok statue without flying away and destroy it with the Skull Hammer. But upon entering the chamber behind the statue is greeted with a stone tablet and a spirit of a Kokiri, which are not present in the game. The Kokiri speaks to Link, revealing his name as Fado, the ancestor of Makar the Korok. He was one of two sages killed by Ganondorf in order to sap the Master Sword of its power. Not only does this prove the blood connection between the forest-dwelling Kokiri and Korok spirits, but it also reveals to Link that Fado does indeed have a living descendant, Makar, who Link needs to find and help awaken as the new Sage of Wind in order to empower the Blade of Evil's Bane once again. Oddly enough, the other awakened sage in the game is Medley, the Rito, who, as you know, are a race of flying bird-like people. Yet Medley is awakened as the Sage of Earth and not Wind, while Makar is awakened as Wind instead of Earth. If we recall that the forest and wind elements are often linked in Zelda games, Makar's Wind Sage connection makes more sense, but that's neither here nor there. The Wind Temple and its sage likely contributed to embodying the essence of swift, wind-like justice to be carried out by the sword and its chosen hero. And the trees and plant life within the temple symbolize the life that the hero is sworn to protect, as opposed to the essence of death, which permeates the walls of the Earth Temple.
The last dungeon we'll cover in this video is by far the shortest of them all. I mean, the entire thing is one room, but it's also by far the most intriguing. The ghost ship, which appears in an eerie storm at night in different locations across the Great Sea depending on the shape of the moon, surrounded by floating spirit flames and emitting a strange chant, has forever haunted my yearning to understand the lore of the Zelda universe, as well as my nightmares. Some super hardcore vintage fans of my channel here might remember that long ago I had an entire theory about this very same ship, and I'm here to tell you today that what I'll say in this video will differ slightly. If you're interested in my full, earlier, more speculative thoughts on this strange vessel though, feel free to check that video out. The ghost ship plays a crucial role in the game in that Link absolutely must not only track down and discover the ship itself, but also figure out how to board and access it in order to complete the game. If Link approaches the ship without first obtaining its ghost ship chart, the vessel will simply disappear once Link gets too close. In order to obtain the ghost ship chart though, Link has to travel to the Diamond Step Island and descend underneath it, where he's met with another chilling scene, an entire buried ship graveyard. It's completely unknown how these sea vessels were buried here, but there are torches spread throughout the area and magical warping pots that Link must use to navigate the maze of ship corpses in order to find the chest containing the ghost ship chart. There are also several floor masters in the area that will return Link to the beginning of the maze if he's unfortunate enough to get caught. This all heavily implies that whoever did this, whoever buried these vessels here and constructed the maze and hid the ghost chart, did so on purpose. And automatically, because of the direct connection between this graveyard and the ominous ghost ship itself, I think it's very plausible that whoever made this area is also responsible for the existence of the ghost ship. After Link retrieves the chart and therefore is able to hunt down and approach the ship, he's mysteriously transported into its interior without actually having to climb aboard. And once inside, it's clear that wherever Link is not of the mortal realm. Huge tears in the ship's frame can be seen, yet instead of seeing the night sky or seawater on the outside of the ship, we can see countless ghosts swarming around the outside. There are a few enemies inside the boat, 2 Poes and a Wizrobe, all of which have connections to reanimated dead. Once they're all defeated though, Link is able to climb a ladder and retrieve either a Triforce chart or an actual shard of the Triforce depending on which version of the game you play. One of the creepiest features of the ghost ship would be the strange portrait located above the treasure chest, which bears a wide, menacing grin towards Link that disappears whenever he gets close. After looting the chest for the Triforce, a ghostly scream can be heard and Link immediately passes out and reawakens aboard the King of Red Lions, with the ghost ship forever fading into non-existence. Now obviously, due to the nature of such a dungeon, the ghost ship must be explained with some large degree of theoretical analysis which isn't explicitly proven in game, meaning you are more than welcome to believe what you would like to instead, if you so choose. But I think it's quite likely that since the breaking apart and hiding of the shards of the Triforce of Courage was something ordained by the Kingdom of Hyrule long ago when the Hero of Time left the timeline, the ghost ship hiding one of these shards is, in that case, something the Hylians specifically planned and executed. I think it's quite likely that, given the at least 3 ships located in the ship graveyard and the countless souls surrounding the ghost ship, the ship may actually be the culmination of the spirits of Hyrule's ancient navy who used to pilot those ships in the graveyard, who all gave their lives in order to hide one of the shards from Ganondorf's grasp in their undead servitude. However, they had to come up with some kind of method for discovering the shard should the hero arise once again and have need of it, hence the carefully crafted ship graveyard maze. Perhaps it's even the Triforce Shard itself that's able to keep the ghosts alive. And that's why when Link obtains it, they're able to finally move on from this realm, and as they do so, they emit one last chilling scream before disappearing forever. And that wraps up this half of Wind Waker's dungeon lore, except for that creepy face above the ghost ship's treasure chest. Who knows why it grins from ear to ear.
Thanks Bandit for having me on to talk Wind Waker. If you'd like more analysis, check out the counterpart video over on my channel where we'll dive into dungeons like the Earth Temple and Tower of the Gods. Cheers.
Thank you guys so much for watching, and an enormous thanks goes to Zeltik for not only joining me in this video, but helping with the theories and analyses of the dungeons. Please consider leaving a like on the video if you enjoyed it, or at least our efforts into making it, and subscribe if you haven't already for much more gaming lore. With Metroid on the way, hint hint. Huge thanks as always to my bandit crew who are the reason I keep going with the channel, and by the way, I'm looking forward to seeing some of you at PAX right now actually. That's all I've got for this one, so follow me on my socials, and I'll see you in a sec over on Zeltik's channel for the rest of the dungeons. This is Bandit, looking forward to seeing you next time, and signing out. Peace!